The White House said it expects Mullers' investigation to end, quote, soon, but only half of the interviews sought with top White House and Justice Department officials have taken place. There are no pending requests to interview the president or the vice president. Elaine?
Well, Major, has the White House given any reason as to why it expects this investigation to wrap up soon?
Well, obviously there are those here in the White House working with the Mueller investigators and Robert Mueller, the special counsel. I'm told by those who were involved in that process, nearly all of the document requests that have come from Mueller's investigators, the percentage to me was put at 98%, have been fulfilled. There are a couple of document requests pending, but most of the documents are in Mueller investigators' hands. And, as I just indicated, half of the interviews have occurred. The White House lawyers believe the other half will be done soon. They expect that portion of the investigation, the interview side of it, to be wrapped up around Thanksgiving, maybe a tiny bit after that. And then they expect Mueller to know everything he wants to know or has sought to know about either White House officials, Justice Department officials, or those who were involved in key decisions at the White House but who have subsequently left.
Major, how is the White House squaring its defense when, as you pointed out, there are a number of factual problems?
Well, they're making the best case that they can, but it's a tough case to make. To suggest that George Papadopoulos had nothing to do with anything and the president can't remember him. The essential explanation for George Papadopoulos, let's set Rick Gates and Paul Manafort aside for just a second, is that the Trump campaign was pretty well disorganized, didn't have a foreign policy team, rushed one together. The president really didn't know who these people were. The explanation about that statement he made to the Washington Post, it was in our colleague Jeff Pegues's piece, excellent guy. The president, then candidate Trump, was simply reading from a piece of paper that had just been handed to him. He had no idea what he was talking about and no idea who he was describing. Well, that is not necessarily a defense commonly associated with Donald Trump, the president, or Donald Trump, the businessman. Terrible memory, lack of attention to detail, and borderline incompetence. But in the George Papadopoulos case, that's really what the White House is trying to tell the American public. As far as Rick Gates and Paul Manafort had a substantial role as a delegate counter. He remained an advisor on the outside during the campaign. He was a significant advisor during the transition. Rick Gates was one of the chief fundraisers and organizers of President Trump's inauguration. Tom Barrack, one of the president's closest friends in the private sector, then hired Rick Gates as a month-to-month consultant, lobbying this White House on lots of key issues, infrastructure, energy, and trade. This morning, Barrack severed his relationship with Rick Gates.
And Major, this was already going to be a busy week for the Trump administration. Despite saying this has nothing to do with the president, are people within the administration concerned about how this could affect their agenda this week?
How could they not be concerned? This is another rather large ripple in the political universe. I think that's putting it mildly. And that's the worst possible circumstance for this Trump White House, which was already behind schedule on tax reform and seeing the elements of it beginning to fray before its very eyes. What am I talking about? Well, this weekend, Bloomberg, with an excellent bit of reporting, said the House Ways and Means Committee, which is putting together the initial package of tax reform and tax cuts, may phase in corporate tax rates starting in 2018, phasing them in fully sometime by 2022. Well, that's much slower than the markets predicted and expected, much slower than the president has advocated for. And if that's the position that House Republicans take on that question, maybe some of the political support either from the White House or other sectors of American business long advocating tax reform may peel off, making that an even more difficult legislative proposition than it already was. You take those policy issues and the politics around that on tax reform beginning to destabilize that situation, you throw into these indictments and plea agreement, it makes for a much more turbulent political atmosphere. The White House knows that's the reality, but is going to try to press ahead as best it can.
Right. Major Garrett at the White House for us. Major, thank you.
Sure.